The small town of Madura had always been full of sounds, bells from temples, the laughter of children running barefoot, and the soft rumble of scooters passing through narrow lanes. But that morning, it was not the noise that people noticed. It was the silence of one woman, Lakshmi Pichai. She stood at the edge of the gathering, wearing a faded sari, her hands folded tightly in front of her. The school had invited parents for the annual prize ceremony. Proud mothers and fathers filled the front rows, holding smartphones, clapping loudly, and calling out their children's names with pride. Lakshmi stood near the back. She didn't carry a phone, she didn't speak much, and she didn't clap when her son's name was called. First prize in science, Sundar Pichai, the teacher announced. The crowd clapped politely. Sundar walked to the stage, his shirt freshly ironed, his face calm but glowing with quiet pride. He looked toward the back where his mother stood. She smiled, just a little. That was enough for him, but not for everyone else. Some of the other parents turned to whisper, "Why does she always wear the same sari? Can't she sit with the rest of us? Look at her, doesn't even clap. Does she even care?" The words were not loud, but they were sharp. They carried the weight of judgment, of mockery, dressed as curiosity. Lakshmi heard it, but she didn't move. After the ceremony, as the parents gathered for tea and biscuits, one well-dressed mother made her way toward Lakshmi. Her gold bangles jingled with each step. She smiled a smile that did not reach her eyes. "You must be Sundar's mother," she said sweetly. "He's very smart. Must be difficult raising such a bright boy all by yourself." Lakshmi smiled politely. "He works hard." The woman leaned in closer. "I just wonder, with so little money, how do you manage? Sending him to school, keeping him dressed so neatly. It must be a miracle." Some of the others nearby laughed softly. It was a trap, disguised as a compliment. Lakshmi simply nodded. "We manage." The woman chuckled. "You're very quiet. I suppose that's a kind of strength too." Lakshmi remained still. Her silence was not weakness. It was patience. It was dignity. But Sundar had seen it all. From behind a pillar, Sundar watched the scene unfold. He saw the fake smiles, the sideways glances, the half whispers. Something in his heart tightened. Not from shame, but from a deep, rising fire. That night, Sundar didn't speak much. They sat on the floor, sharing simple food, rice and dal, with a single mango between them. Double quotes, AMMA, he said, after a long pause. "Why didn't you say anything to that woman?" Lakshmi didn't look up from her plate. "What would I have said? You could have told her about how you saved every rupee, about how you stayed up stitching clothes at night, how you taught me science, using old newspaper and chalk on the wall." Lakshmi smiled gently. "Those stories are for you, not for them." Sundar didn't understand it then, not fully. But something changed in him that night. Not just the way he looked at the world, but the way he wanted the world to look at his mother. Years passed. Sundar moved to Chennai, then to America. Each step forward came with struggle. Different country, different culture. He studied hard, worked harder, and slowly made his way into the world of technology. People began to notice him, first as a quiet thinker, then as a problem solver, and eventually as the man who would help build the future. But even then, whenever he returned home, he still sat on the same floor, shared rice and dal, and split a mango with his mother. One day, after becoming the CEO of Google, Sundar was invited back to India to speak at a national education summit. Politicians, tech leaders, school principals, and reporters filled the grand hall. The cameras were waiting. Lights were bright. Everyone was expecting big words, big promises. Sundar stepped onto the stage, but instead of diving into numbers or achievements, he paused. "Before I begin," he said, "I want to introduce someone." A door opened quietly at the side of the hall. Lakshmi walked in, slowly, wearing a simple sari, just like before. Her hair was gray now, her eyes still calm. The crowd turned. There was a hush. "This," Sundar said, "is my Uma, Lakshmi Pichai." Some people clapped. A few stood. Sundar continued, "Many of you know me as a CEO. Some know my educational background, but very few know the full story." He looked directly at the row of school officials sitting in the front. "When I was a boy, my mother stood quietly at the back of the room during my school prize ceremony. She didn't clap. She didn't speak. But she had done more for my education than anyone else ever could." He paused. The hall was still. Some of the parents tried to embarrass her that day. They whispered about her clothes, about her silence, about our poverty. But my mother never needed applause. She gave me courage without saying a word. A few people looked uncomfortable now. The words stung, but not with anger, with truth. "Today," Sundar said softly, "I want this room to learn one lesson. Success doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes, it wears a faded sari and stands quietly in the corner, hoping her child will be seen, even if she is not." Lakshmi looked down, eyes shining doubt, and for the first time, the crowd gave her what she had never asked for: respect. As the applause filled the room, one woman in the audience wiped her eyes. It was the same woman who had once asked Lakshmi, "How do you manage?" That moment became the turning point of the event. News channels played it again and again. "CEO honors his silent mother," the headlines read. But for Sundar, it wasn't just about honoring her. It was about changing the way people look at others, not just their achievements, but their sacrifices, not their silence, but their strength. That was just the beginning. The applause was still echoing in Sundar's ears as he stepped off the stage. His heart wasn't racing with pride. It was full of something deeper: peace. He had waited years to speak those words, not for the world's praise, but for his mother to know that every silent sacrifice was seen. Lakshmi walked beside him, her hands still folded. She had never imagined this kind of attention. People in the hallway turned to look at her, some with awe, others with guilt. A journalist leaned in with a microphone. "Ma'am, how does it feel to be the mother of the most powerful man in tech?" Lakshmi gave a soft smile. "He's still the same boy who forgets to eat if he's reading a book." The cameras caught that smile, but they didn't see what Sundar noticed: her trembling fingers. She wasn't used to this world of flashing lights and sharp questions. They exited through the back door of the conference hall. The car was waiting. "Amma," Sundar said as he helped her in, "did you mind me calling you on stage?" She looked at him. "No, but they'll talk." "Let them," Sundar replied firmly. "They've talked all my life. Now they'll listen." But what Sundar did next wasn't just about being heard. That evening, as they returned to the hotel, Sundar sat by the window, watching the city lights. He remembered the dusty streets of Madurai, the cracked walls of his childhood room, the smell of turmeric and jasmine from the old kitchen. A thought had been growing in him for years. But now, after what happened at the summit, it took root. He picked up the phone. "Hello," he said. "I want to visit my old school tomorrow morning. Quietly. No media. Just me and Amma." The next morning, the car drove through the narrow streets of Madurai. Lakshmi looked out the window, her face unreadable. They passed by the tea stall where Sundar used to wait for his bus. They passed the old cycle repair shop, still open, still the same man fixing tires. When they reached the school gate, nothing had changed. The walls were still yellow, slightly faded. The bell still rang the same way, only now, the principal was waiting nervously at the door. "Sir Pichai, this is such an honor," the principal stammered. "Just Sundar," he replied. "This is not a visit for cameras. It's for remembering." He looked at the classrooms, the old science lab, the broken bench where he once wrote his first code idea with a pencil. Lakshmi stood near the tree in the yard, the same spot where she had stood years ago during the prize ceremony. "Do you remember that day?" she asked him softly. "I remember everything," Sundar said. I also remember the voices that tried to make you small. Lakshmi touched the bark of the tree. Those voices never reached me. I had something stronger. What? Your future. Just then, a group of students ran past them. One of the girls paused. She looked up at Lakshmi, then at Sundar. Are you the mother of Sundar, sir? She asked shyly. Lakshmi smiled. Yes. The girl hesitated. My amma works as a helper in a hospital. Some girls laugh at me because of that. They say I won't become anything. Sundar knelt down beside her. What's your name? Kirthi. Kirthi, he said gently. Do you know why I became who I am? She shook her head. Because my Oma worked harder than anyone, and she never gave up. Not even when people tried to make her feel small. Kirthi looked at Lakshmi. Then she smiled. Then I won't give up either. That one sentence planted something new in Sundar's mind. He turned to the principal. How many students here come from homes like mine? The principal thought for a second. More than half. Sundar nodded. I want to do something, not just for them, but for their mothers. And so began a journey no one predicted. Within weeks, Sundar set up a fund named the Silent Strength Initiative. It wasn't just a scholarship. It was a program that honored mothers who raised children with limited means but endless dreams. For every student who showed potential, their mother would receive support healthcare, education, job training, and every year, one mother from Madura would be invited to speak not just at school, but at the national summit. When the news broke, many praised it, but not everyone. Some critics said it was too emotional, not strategic, not scalable. He's trying to glorify poverty, one article wrote. This is sentimental politics, said another. But Sundar remained quiet, until one day, during a live interview, the anchor asked, Mr. Pichai, is this a tech initiative or a personal mission? Sundar smiled. It's a human mission, and it began when a few people tried to embarrass my mother. Instead, they inspired a movement. Meanwhile, back in Madurai, Lakshmi kept her life simple. She still walked to the temple every morning. She still bought vegetables from the same vendor. But people greeted her differently now. Not with pity, not with fake smiles, but with respect. A young woman came to her one day and said, Auntie, I joined your son's program. I'm learning how to start a small business. Lakshmi nodded. Then make it big. Not just in money, but in heart. But things didn't stay peaceful forever. A powerful businessman from the city, who had once mocked Lakshmi publicly, felt threatened by the attention the program was getting. His own educational foundation was losing donors. He called a meeting with school principals. This is emotional drama, he said. We need to remind people what real success looks like, not sympathy stories. And so, quietly, he began a campaign to discredit the Silent Strength Initiative. He invited reporters to question the funds. He asked school boards to remove Sundar's posters. And he did something more dangerous. He sent a team to dig into Lakshmi's past, hoping to find something, anything, to embarrass her again. But what they found wasn't scandal, it was sacrifice. And, soon, the very attempt to shame her turned into something unexpected, because Sundar was watching, and he had already learned from his mother how to turn embarrassment into power. The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains of Lakshmi's modest home. She sat on the floor as always, gently rolling dough for chapatis, humming a tune that Sundar had heard since childhood. She didn't know yet that her name was on news channels again. But this time, it wasn't admiration. This time, they were trying to tear her down. A popular news anchor spoke with sharp confidence on national television. Our sources reveal that Lakshmi Pichai once worked as a domestic helper for years. Is this the role model we should be celebrating? In another segment, a panelist sneered, There's nothing inspirational about poverty. This is an attempt to make emotional stories replace real merit. The headlines followed quickly. Truth about Sundar's mother, what the world didn't know. From maid to icon. Is the narrative real? But Sundar did not panic. He watched, he listened, and he waited. Meanwhile, Lakshmi heard it all through, neighbors and well-wishers. One woman came running to her gate, breathless. "Akka, they are saying things about you on TV. Bad things. Lies." Lakshmi only folded her hands gently. "If they speak of me, let it be. I know who I am. But aren't you angry?" Lakshmi looked up at the sky. "Anger burns the vessel that holds it. I won't hold it." But Sundar, he held something else. Not anger, not revenge, but focus. He knew something the media didn't. They were digging up a past that had no shame, and Sundar planned to turn every headline into a mirror. 3 days later, Sundar called a press conference. The room was packed. Every journalist who had mocked, every analyst who had doubted, every critic who had whispered, they were all there. But when Sundar stepped up to the mic, he didn't bring charts. He didn't bring a PowerPoint. He brought something else. "I've heard a lot about my mother in the past week," he began. His voice was calm, measured, like the ocean before a wave rises. "Some people are asking if her past as a domestic helper makes her unworthy of praise. Others say we're celebrating struggle too much. Today, I want to answer them." He held up a photograph. It showed Lakshmi in her 20s, sweeping the floor of a classroom, her back bent. A small boy sitting in the corner with a notebook. "Sundar, this is my story," he said. "Not edited, not polished, real." He turned to the room. "Yes, my mother worked as a maid. She cleaned schools she couldn't afford to send me to. She washed floors while reciting multiplication tables to me. She stitched clothes by moonlight so I could read books during the day." The room was silent. "You call it poverty. I call it power." He pointed gently to the journalists. "You call it shame. I call it sacrifice." One of the reporters raised a hand. "But sir, don't you think this romanticizes struggle?" Sundar nodded. "Struggle is not romantic. It's real. And sometimes, the only way out of it is through a mother's hands. Hands that clean, cook, carry, and still manage to lift a child toward the sky." He paused. The emotion in his voice was steady but undeniable. "You didn't uncover a secret. You uncovered her strength, and you exposed your weakness, the inability to see dignity in labor." The applause was slow at first, but then it rose, louder, fuller, deeper. Across the country, people began to speak up. Teachers, nurses, vegetable vendors, factory workers. They began sharing stories of their own mothers. My mother's strength started trending. A young woman from Delhi posted, "My mother ironed clothes for 12 families so I could go to college. Thank you Lakshmi Pichai for showing me that she is a hero." In Tamil Nadu, autorickshaw drivers put up stickers that read, "Amma knows best." And the businessman who had started the smear campaign, his foundation was now under fire for misusing donations. But Sundar didn't respond to that. He didn't need to, because something greater had started. In Madurai, a small group of mothers stood outside the school gates, holding hands. One of them, a widow, said, "If Lakshmi Akka can raise a CEO, we can raise doctors, artists, leaders." Lakshmi visited them. She didn't speak much, but she brought a gift, a small bag of mangoes. "This is all I brought for Sundar, every exam day," she said with a warm smile. It helped him think sweet thoughts. One of the younger mothers, teary-eyed, whispered, "Thank you, Akka, for walking in front, so we can follow." Lakshmi gently touched her shoulder. "No, now you lead. I will follow." Back in Delhi, a national news channel invited Sundar for another interview. They wanted a technical discussion, something about artificial intelligence, but Sundar had a different idea. He looked at the camera and said, "Before we talk about machines that learn, let's talk about the women who taught us how to learn with nothing but love." He continued, "Our country is filled with women like my Amma. You just don't see them, or worse, you see them, and walk past. He took out a notebook. This is the book where my mother wrote our monthly budget, school fees, and reminders. She also wrote motivational quotes in Tamil. He opened a page and read one aloud. Do not ask if the road is hard. Ask if your feet are strong. She wrote that the day I failed a test. The anchor sat silently. The crew didn't interrupt, because everyone knew this wasn't a tech story anymore. It was a human story, and it was working. Donors began funding the Silent Strength Initiative. In greater numbers, even Google employees from around the world began a volunteer project to mentor children from under-resourced schools, naming it Project Uma. But as always, not everyone liked the light Sundar was shining. A popular TV debate show ran a segment titled, Is Sundar Pichai making India too emotional? A former CEO grumbled, We need strong minds, not sentimental speeches. Sundar watched it all, and he smiled, because he was already planning his next move. This one wouldn't just protect his mother's name, it would honor all mothers, and it would begin not on TV, but in a classroom, where a young girl had once whispered that her mother was just a helper. It began quietly, just like everything his mother ever did. No fanfare, no press release, no fancy dinner with investors, just one email sent from Sundar's personal account to a list of school principals across Tamil Nadu. I want to start a new kind of classroom. A room where every child sees their mother not as ordinary, but as extraordinary, and I want the mothers to be there too. Most principals didn't know how to respond. Some thought it was a joke, others thought it was impossible, but one young principal named Davy, from a government school in Salem, replied, We don't have much space, but we have a heart big enough to try. That one reply changed everything. Within weeks, Sundar personally funded the building of a new classroom, but this was no ordinary classroom. It had no fixed teacher, no fixed subjects. Instead, every month, one mother would take the front seat, not to teach math or science, but to tell her story, her real story, how she raised her child, what she gave up, how she survived. They called it Uma's class. The first session was led by a woman named Parvati, who had raised 3 children by ironing clothes day and night. Her voice trembled when she started. The kids fidgeted. The mother sitting in the back looked nervous. But then, Parvati pulled out a small iron box burnt on the edges. This iron, she said, paid for 3 school uniforms, 2 bags, and 1 bicycle. A silence fell in the room. I used to sleep 2 hours a night. My hands would shake. But every time I saw my son waiting for school, I forgot the pain. A boy in the front row began to cry. It was her son, by the end of the class. Every child had written 1 letter to their mother. No grades, no homework, just truth. Word spread fast. Other schools wrote in soon. Uma's class became a movement. Every week, in schools across India, mothers who were once invisible stepped into the spotlight, not for awards, not for sympathy, but for acknowledgement. And it wasn't just women from small homes, bank clerks, vegetable vendors, tailors, nurses, farmers, HOUSEMAIDS. Each one had a story that shook the classroom walls more than any textbook ever could. But while hearts were opening, the resistance was growing. Some education boards raised objections. This is not formal education, they argued. Why are we emotionalizing classrooms? Others added. A few politicians even called it a distraction. Children need to focus on success, not stories of struggle. Sundar didn't reply with words. He replied with results. Test scores in the participating schools didn't go down, they went up. Student discipline improved. Bullying dropped sharply, and more importantly, parents especially, mothers began attending school events for the first time in years. They came not with shame, but with pride. Lakshmi watched all of this from afar. She didn't travel much. Her knees weren't strong, but she followed every article, every photo. Every time a mother stood in front of a blackboard, Lakshmi felt a little taller in her chair. One evening, as she folded clothes, she looked up at Sundar. "You're not building classrooms," she said quietly. "You're building mirrors." "Mirrors?" Sundar asked. "Yes, so children can finally see the real heroes who raise them." But just as the program gained momentum, something happened that threatened to break it. A top-ranked private school in Mumbai refused to host Uma's class. The school board claimed it would lower the standard. A leaked internal email read, "These poor narratives don't match the elite brand of our school." It went viral, and it broke hearts. One student from that very school, Arav Mehta, sent Sundar an email. "Sir, my mother used to sell poppets to help pay my tuition, but now she's too ashamed to come for parent meetings. I want her to speak. Please help." Sundar read the email late at night. He didn't sleep. By morning, he had made a decision. He would visit that school personally, not with anger, but with a message. A week later, he walked into the auditorium of the Mumbai school. Every seat was full. Parents, students, teachers, cameras, and in the front, Rurav and his mother. She looked nervous, a simple woman in a plain cotton saree. Some parents looked her up and down. Some whispered just like they once did to Lakshmi. Sundar walked up to the mic. He looked around the hall, then paused. "This," he said, "is the most important school visit of my life." He turned to Araf's mother. "Ma'am, would you please join me on stage?" She hesitated. Aarav held her hand together. They walked up. This woman, Sundar said, sold poppets, walked 4 kilometers daily, and still packed lunch for her son every morning. Today, that son tops his class. He looked at the school board. "You say these stories lower your standard." He stepped forward. "No, they raise your humanity." He paused, scanning the room. "What is the purpose of education, if not to make us kinder? What is the point of success, if we cannot honor the hands that shaped us?" Silence, then applause. Real, rising, unstoppable. The next day, the school board reversed its decision. They announced the launch of their own Umas class. Not just that other elite schools followed, and so he didn't celebrate. He simply went home. That evening, he sat beside Lakshmi and told her everything. She listened then. After a long silence, she said, "They will still try. Not everyone will understand." Sundar nodded. Double quotes, "I know, but I will. Keep teaching, even when they fight you, especially then." Lakshmi smiled. "Then you are still my boy." But in the shadows, someone was watching all this with growing discomfort. The businessman who once tried to smear Lakshmi. He hadn't forgotten how Sundar's speech had undone his plans now. His empire was shrinking. Donors were leaving. Schools were choosing Uma's class over his. Foundation's programs. And he was furious. He made one final move. He filed a legal complaint, claiming Sundar's program was promoting personal propaganda in public education. Media houses picked it up quickly. As Sundar Pichai crossed a line, when inspiration becomes influence, a conflict. But this time Sundar didn't call a press conference. He didn't post online. Instead, he took his mother's advice. When the noise is loud, speak with your actions. And what he did next silenced the country. It started with a single sheet of paper. No speech, no post, no press conference, just one formal declaration, delivered quietly to India's Ministry of Education. In it, Sundar Pichai announced that he would donate his personal salary for the next 5 years to a new independent trust called Voices of Uma. But that wasn't the headline. The real shock came in the next paragraph. This trust will be governed by a council of mothers, working women, single mothers, farmers, nurses, widows, who raise their children with dignity, even when no one noticed. That document was leaked within hours. By evening, every channel was talking about it. Pichai gives power back to the hands that raised him. Mothers to lead national education reform a world first. The businessman who filed the complaint tried to spin it. This is just image building, he said on a debate show. But the nation wasn't listening to him anymore. They were listening to someone else. Because that same evening, Lakshmi Pichai did something she had never done before. She gave her first public interview. She sat on a small wooden chair in her home in Madurai. No makeup, no jewelry, just her usual plain saree and her soft voice. The journalist asked, "Lakshmi ji, are you proud of Sundar?" She smiled gently. "I was proud when he first tied his own shoelace. This is just more walking." The clip went viral within minutes, but the real turning point came. The next day, hundreds of mothers across the country, many of them never having spoken into a microphone, shared their stories. One by one, a street vendor from Varanasi recorded a voice note. "My son hides what I do, but today, I told him I raised you selling chaat, and I'm not ashamed." A fisherwoman from Kerala sent in a video, "I never went to school, but now my daughter teaches me every night, and I taught her how to swim before she could walk." A domestic worker from Hyderabad wrote, "When Madam shouted at me for taking too long, I was washing my son's only shirt. Now I wash it with pride." They weren't just stories. They were a storm, and it shook the court too. When the businessman's legal case finally reached the courtroom, he expected silence. He didn't expect what came next, because on the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed, not with lawyers, but with mothers. Some sat quietly with toddlers on their laps. Some stood holding photographs of their children, and when the judge arrived, even she paused for a moment, surprised. Sundar didn't come in a suit. He came wearing a simple white kurta, the same kind his father once wore to work. He stood, calm and composed. "Your Honor," he said, "I'm not here to defend a program. I'm here to defend an idea." "And what idea is that?" the judge asked. "That the most overlooked teachers in our country are mothers, and if we silence their stories, we silence our future." The opposing lawyer argued, "This is emotional manipulation. Schools are not storytelling grounds." Sundar turned to him. "Then why do we still quote Gandhi's letters? Or Kalam's memories?" "Because stories teach more than rules ever will." The judge didn't interrupt. She listened, and then, for the first time in court history, she allowed a non-lawyer to speak. Lakshmi Pichai. She stepped forward slowly. Her voice was calm. "When my son was small, I taught him how to stand. Today, he's teaching others how to stand for their mothers. I didn't ask for this attention, but if our silence is seen as weakness, then maybe it's time we speak." Tears filled more eyes than anyone expected. The judge closed the file gently and said, "This is not just a case. This is a moment, and I will not stop it." Case dismissed. The crowd broke into applause. The businessman left without a word. Outside the courthouse, mothers stood holding hands, chanting softly, "Amma, ki awaz, sab's body takat." A mother's voice is the greatest strength. That night, Sundar didn't give interviews. He didn't celebrate. He returned home, sat with Lakshmi, and quietly made 2 cups of tea. "You were amazing today," he said. Lakshmi shook her head. "I was shaking, but you stood anyway. Only because I wasn't alone." He smiled. "You never were." As voices of Uma began to expand, something remarkable happened. For the first time in the country's history, mothers were invited to national education panels. Policies were rewritten to include parent experiences. Textbooks began including real stories of everyday women, and in one school, a girl stood in front of the class and said, "My mother is my hero. She can't read, but she taught me how to never fall." No one laughed. They clapped, back in Madurai. Lakshmi continued her simple life. But now, every time she stepped out, someone would fold their hands and say, "Namaste, Amma." She never changed. Same sari, same slippers, same quiet strength, and Sundar. He continued to lead at Google. But in every major speech, he now ended with one line: "The world talks about artificial intelligence, but never forget, the first real intelligence in your life was your mother's instinct." People around the world began adopting Uma's class: Kenya, Vietnam, Brazil, France, even Silicon Valley. And all of it started because someone tried to embarrass one quiet woman. Someone tried to shrink her presence, but her son turned it into a lesson for the world. But as the world began to change, one day brought news that no one was ready for. Lakshmi fell ill. Her health had been quietly fading, and suddenly, Sundar found himself not at a press event, but in a small hospital room, holding his mother's hand. Machines beeped softly, but her voice was still calm. "Don't stop what you're doing, Kanna," she said, "even if I'm not here." Sundar's hands tightened around hers. "You will always be here." She smiled faintly. "Not in photos, not in awards, in classrooms, in stories, in hearts," Sundar whispered. But as the machines continued, their slow rhythm, a new silence began to grow. Not of sadness, but of something deeper, a moment the world would soon feel. The hospital room was dimly lit, quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the occasional rustle of nurses moving gently outside. Sundar sat beside Lakshmi, his hands wrapped around hers, not ready to let go. Outside, the world waited. Inside, time slowed. Lakshmi opened her eyes, just slightly. Her voice was no more than a whisper. "Do you remember that mango tree?" she asked. Sundar leaned in. "The one behind our house." She gave a slow nod. "You planted it when you were 6. I told you it might not grow. The soil was dry, but you watered it every day," he said softly. "No," she smiled weakly. "You did." Tears welled in Sundar's eyes. "It grew strong because of you." "No, Kanna," she whispered. "It grew strong because you believed it could." Those were her last words. A few hours later, Lakshmi, Pichai mother, teacher, warrior in silence, took her final breath with her son by her side. The news broke quietly at first, but the wave that followed was unlike anything the world had seen. Lakshmi, Pichai passes away. India mourns the mother who raised a world leader. From silence to legacy, a farewell to the woman who taught us what strength really means. Memorials were held across cities and villages, but Sundar didn't attend any press events. He returned to Madatu, the small home, to the empty kitchen, to the place where every wall still carried her warmth. He sat on the floor, in the same corner where he used to study while she cooked. The silence was heavier now, but it wasn't empty. It was full of memories. That night, he made one promise to himself. He would not let her story end here. Exactly 40 days later, a national event was announced. Lakshmi Pichai Day, to be observed every year on the anniversary of her passing. But it wasn't just a tribute. It came with an action. On this day, every school in India, whether government or private, would host a special session. One mother, one classroom, one story. No textbook, no exam, just a lesson from life. On the first Lakshmi Pichai Day, Sundar stood in front of a classroom in Madura. It wasn't a fancy event, no cameras, just 30 students in plastic chairs. "Today," he said, "I won't teach you about technology. I won't talk about Google. I will tell you about a woman who had only one sari, but gave me the courage to dream across oceans." He pulled out a small wooden box. Inside it was the same notebook his mother once used to write expenses and Tamil quotes. He read the last line she ever wrote: "When I am gone, let the children remember not my face, but my faith in them." Students sat silently, eyes wide, some wiping tears. After the session, a girl walked up to Sundar. She held out a worn-out picture. "This is my Uma," she said. "She picks garbage, but she told me I could become a scientist." Sundar smiled, gently. then she is already a scientist of hope. The movement spread across the globe. Kenya, mothers shared stories of growing food in dry seasons. Peru, women taught how they fought floods to protect their homes. Japan, grandmothers told tales of rebuilding after earthquakes. In every corner of the world, the voice of rose, and at the center of it, always, was a woman who never raised her voice, but raised a son, who raised a world. On the first anniversary of her passing, Sundar visited that mango tree behind their old house. It had grown tall, strong, full of fruit. He sat beneath it, alone. Birds, chirped, leaves, rustled, he whispered, Oma, they tried to embarrass you, but you turned that shame into strength, and now the world sees what I always saw. He pulled a small mango from the branch and placed it beside the tree's roots. Every year, I'll come back, not as a CEO, not as a speaker, just as your son. He stood, dusted his hands, and walked away. Today, there are thousands of classrooms across the world. Mothers who were once hidden behind curtains now walk proudly onto stages. Children no longer lower their voices when they speak of their mother's struggles. They lift their heads instead, and, when asked what inspired it all, they give only one answer. The years passed gently, but their impact echoed loudly. Every time a child stood in front of a class and spoke about their mother, without shame, Lakshmi, Pichai's story lived on. Every time a young girl in a village said, my Uma is not just a maid, she is my hero, Lakshmi's voice spoke through them. And every time Sundar stepped onto a global stage and looked into a sea of faces, he saw one face in every crowd, hers. But this final part of the story didn't begin with applause. It began with a letter, a handwritten one, sent by a student from a small tribal school in Orissa. Her name was Mala. Her handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged in places, but her words were clear. Dear Sundar, sir, I don't know if you will read this. My Uma cannot write. She does not speak Hindi or English. But she taught me everything, how to count stars, how to plant seeds, and how to protect myself. Our village is not on the map, but I want her to be remembered too. Not with a statue, just with a story. Sundar read it twice. Then he sat silently for a long time. The world had built statues for kings, for generals, for men with medals, but not for mothers with scars on their hands from grinding wheat, not for women who walked miles with buckets of water and returned with strength. No one clapped for, and he realized his mother didn't need a statue either. She needed something better. Months later, on the second Lakshmi Pichai day, Sundar made one final announcement. He stood at the United Nations podium in New York City. He didn't wear a tie. He wore the same plain white kurta. Today, he began, I propose something simple. Not a celebration, not a holiday, but a space. The hall listened. A digital library, a permanent archive of stories written not by authors, but by children about their mothers. He paused. No filters, no edits, just truth. The Uma archive. Every child, from every background, could upload one story about their mother, audio, video, drawings, letters, anything, and every mother would have a page in history, forever, not behind her child, beside them. The room stood in ovation, not because it was a tech idea, but because it was a human one. Within the first year, over 2 million stories were submitted, from the deserts of Rajasthan to the frozen edges of Alaska. A girl wrote, my mother taught me to say no, even when I was scared. A boy said, my Amma couldn't walk, but she stood up for me every day. A child in Syria drew a picture, his mother shielding him from a bomb, and then came Mala. Her story was uploaded with a voice recording. It was in her tribal dialect, translated by a local volunteer. Nit. Her mother sang a lullaby, nothing else, just a song she hummed every night while grinding grain by candlelight, and that song, soft, ancient, unpolished, was downloaded over 3 million times. It became a symbol. Today, classrooms around the world begin their day with Amma, hour. No textbooks, no tests, just stories. And in every one, a seed of strength planted by a woman who once stood quietly behind her son. One day, many years later, Sundar stood alone in the backyard of his childhood home. The mango tree had grown so tall, it touched the rooftop. Children from nearby played in the lane. He held a small notebook in his hand. His daughter had just written her first story in it. My dad is smart, but his mother was wiser. He smiled. A quiet wind passed through the leaves. He closed his eyes and imagined her voice. Not loud, not proud, just peaceful, like always. People often asked him, Sundar, what is your greatest invention? He always gave the same answer. Not what I built, but who built me. Lakshmi Pichai never wrote a book, never won a medal, never traveled the world, but her strength traveled farther than any plane, farther than any code, and in the hearts of millions, she lives. Not as a statue, but as a story, forever told, forever loved.